Now I have the privilege and honor to turn it over to the great son of Yisrayl, Deacon Yisrayl. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Or Shalom, you may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. The title of my sermon today is "The Love of the Many Will Grow Cold." Now, what we see at this time in the world, all around the world, with the fighting, the wars, is fulfillment of Yeshua's prophecy, Yeshua Messiah's prophecy for this generation. Let's take a look at the prophecy in Matthew 24 and verse 14. And that's found on page 752, Matthew 24, verse 14. And it says, verse 12. Matthew 24, verse 12. And because iniquity, the breaking of Yahweh's law will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. So iniquity is doing away with or not practicing Yahweh's laws of righteousness. Now the whole world, all God-worshipping religions bring forth iniquity, and none of them teach the laws of righteousness. And beware of Satan's preachers, don't let them deceive you. If you'll all turn over to 1 Yochanan. 1 Yochanan chapter 3. And let's look at verse 4, and it says, "Whoever commits sin transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law." Let's go down to verse 7. It says, "Little children, let no man deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. So let no man deceive you." Let's go over to Matthew 7. It's found on page 733, Matthew 7, and verse 15. And it says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorns or figs from thistles? Likewise, every righteous tree brings forth righteous fruit, but a tree of evil brings forth fruit of iniquity. So iniquity brings forth hatred, killing, murder, illegal lust, greed, stealing, fornication, adultery, sodomy, bestiality, homosexuality, sickness, disease, and death." And we can surely see the love growing cold in the world. And let's look at some examples. I have an article here. This article is from blacklistednews.com, and it's entitled, "Police Raid Small Family Farm, Charge Family Seize Animals Because They Were Free Range." In case you don't know what free range is, from the dictionaryreference.com, it means of livestock and domestic poultry permitted to graze or forage for grain, rather than being confined to a feedlot or a small enclosure. So they seized this person's animals because they were allowed to go out and forage for their food out in the field. It says, earlier this month, a family farm in rural New York was raided by police after the owners were cited on a number of trumped-up regulatory violations. Joshua Rockwood, the owner of the farm, is being accused of mistreating his animals, and the local government has begun confiscating some of them. He voluntarily showed local police around his property, which he had not yet tended to that day because of their unexpected interruption. After showing them around, they began to critically assess every aspect of the farm, writing a number of citations for arbitrary offensive. And that word, it means depending on individual discretion and not fixed by law. It says here, Rockwood had a veterinarian visit the farm to check on the animals to confirm that they were well taken care of and in great health. According to reports, the vet said that the animals were just fine and did not seem to share the concerns that the officers alleged during their walkthrough. They also found them to be in perfect health. It says, Rockwood treats his animals better than most factory farms do. But since he uses traditional farming methods, his farm will fail regulatory inspections while factory farms will pass. Now I want you to listen to this part. It says here, meanwhile, New York is one of many states that are currently considering AGAG laws, which place criminal penalties on activists who expose animal abuse at factory farms. The controversial AGAG laws prohibit recording an image or sound without the operator's permission, gaining access to an agricultural operation under false pretenses, asking for a job at a place for the purpose of making recordings, and making a recording while trespassing. The irony is that the state will lock you in a cage for filming the horrific atrocities at a factory farm while simultaneously trumping up ridiculous and petty violations if you aren't a factory farm. So they take the person's animals because they were free roaming, and they don't want you to film what occurs at the factories because abuse goes on there, abuse to the animals. But they'll lock you up for filming that, but they'll take your animals because they're free roaming. And then my second article is it's entitled "How Mercenaries Are Changing Warfare." It says America's reliance on private military companies in Iraq and Afghanistan hasn't just expanded the industry. It may have changed the conduct of international relations. It says, before the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 ended Europe's 30 years war and marked the rise of the modern state system, medieval powers from kings to popes routinely hired private fighters to do battle for them, as state governments sought a monopoly on the use of force within their territories in the 17th century. It says private militaries never really went away, but according to Sean McFate, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and associate professor at National Defense University, they have experienced a resurgence in the past 25 years. McFate himself was a contractor with DynCorp International, one of the private military companies whose rise is the subject of his recent book, The Modern Mercenary. So these are private killers that you can hire to come and fight a war for you, and you can hire them to come and kill a few people, and they make lots of money for killing. It's like hiring a hitman. And remember the prophecy for this generation in Matthew 24, verse 12, how the love will grow cold. There is no love in the world. And where did it start? It started with iniquity, the doing away of Yahweh's laws. Now mankind speaks of love a lot, yet they kill millions of babies every year. They make and sell bombs that can be used for no other purpose than to kill their fellow man. And these are the works of their own hands. Let's go over to 1 Diakonon. 1 Diakonon 5, and let's look at verse 2 through 3. And let's see what the scriptures say what love is. It says, this is found on page 966, 1 Diakonon 5, and starting at verse 2, it says, by this we know that we love the children of Yahweh when we love Yahweh by keeping His laws. For this is the love of Yahweh, that we keep His law, and His law is not grievous. So the laws of Yahweh, they show love. All of Yahweh's laws show love. Look at the 10 Commandments. Do not murder. When you take someone's life, that does not show true love. That shows hate. Do not steal. Do not covet. You shall not bear false testimony. You shall not commit adultery. All of these, when applied, show love to your neighbor. And what we see today with the defilement, the microbes are sick, they can't do their jobs properly, this is all caused from the breaking of Yahweh's laws. And in one of Pastor's sermons, he said, find one of the laws that don't show love. Well, the truth is, they all do. In 1 Diakonon 2, a page over here, in verse 5, it says, But whoever keeps his law, in him truly is the love of Yahweh perfected. By this we know that we are in him. So love is the keeping of Yahweh's laws. And as you can see in the world, none of the major religions teach the 613 laws of Yahweh. They did away with the laws, and as Matthew 24 verse 12 says, iniquity will abound, and the love of the many will grow cold. Well, true peace and joy is only offered here at Yahweh's house, and this is the only place that you will find it. Remember, rejoicing begins here, as the banner outside says. True rejoicing, everyone. So remember to rejoice, and now if you'll all please stand. It's my great honor and privilege to present to you the great Kahan David Hireman Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to address Yahweh's called out ones in this, the Great Feast of Unleavened Bread 2015. You all may be seated. If you could open up in your books of Yahweh to Revelations chapter 11. I'd like to cover some of the scriptures in Revelations chapter 11 today, along with others. And we're familiar with Revelation chapter 11, verse 3, which talks about Yahweh's two witnesses, Jacob and Yisrayl. And it says, I will give to my two witnesses to perform their prophetic offices, and they will foretell events about the 3.5 years those cast about with darkness. And we're into those 3.5 years cast about with darkness. And verse 4 here, these are, as it were, the two olive trees, and as it were, the two lampstands of the seven lampstand, and they are, as it says, ministering for the Father Yahweh in the earth. If we could have a picture of the two witnesses at this time. Right in the center is Pastor Yisrael Abel Hawkins, Yahweh's spokesman. He's described by the prophets as the spokesman. And in the upper right-hand corner, his brother Jacob Hawkins, J.G. Hawkins. Just call me Jacob, he said, when asked for a first name. And Jacob passed away in 1991. And so those are the Yahweh's two witnesses spoken of here in Revelation chapter 11. And with respect to the two olive trees, we know the questions are, there's some questions asked in Zechariah chapter 4. What are, verse 11, for example, what are these two olive trees on the right side of the lampstand and the left side of it? And verse 12, what are these two olive branches which through the two golden pipes empty the golden oil through them? And then verse 14 answers those questions. These are the two anointed ones, the two witnesses in these last days, who stand for the supreme ruler of the whole world. And in these last days, it is the whole world that is being ministered to by the house of Yahweh, by the house established by the two witnesses. Let's just go back briefly to if we could have slide number 2, or the second slide. If you look on this slide in the upper left-hand corner, there is Revelation chapter 2, 11 verse 2. Revelation 11 verse 2, and this is the King James Version. But the court which is outside the temple, and this is one of the things the witness was prophesied to do, measure it not. He measured the temple, but not the outer court. For it is given to the Gentiles, and the holy city the Gentiles will tread under for 42 months. And this is the time period, a prophetic time period, that we're in right now. Pope Francis, he's the one who is treading all holiness in the city of Jerusalem. In fact, the whole world. If you look on to the right side of that slide there, Revelation 13, speaking of specifically of Pope Francis, and there was given unto him the beast. Now, of course, he presides over the beastly system that previous popes have presided over, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given him to make war for 42 months. There it is. Now, Pope Francis, he began his war against all holiness 2 years ago when he was inaugurated into office on March 19th, 2013. So he's been in office for 24 months. He's got 18 months left to go. Verse 6, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against Yahweh, to blaspheme his name and his house. And this is the war he's bringing against the witnesses. This is the character assassination, if you will, that he's bringing against the witness Yisrayl and the witness Jacob, and those who dwell in his house and those who dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over tribes and peoples and languages and nations. So his war against holiness is worldwide. Now, if we go to Revelation, I guess the next picture here, the next slide. You could bring up the next slide. This is the battle that's going on between righteousness and evil in the world. Upper left-hand corner, beloved pastor and overseer Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, and down in the right-hand corner, Pope Francis, the one who, and as the calendar stated in 2014, Yahweh's kingdom versus Satan's kingdom. There's the battle that we see going on. So moving on here, if we look at Revelations 11 verse 7, Revelation 11 verse 7, and when they had finished their testimony, this is speaking of the witness, and when they had finished their testimony, and of course the testimony of the witness Yisrayl continues. But if you could look at the next slide here, this is Revelation 7. When they had finished their testimony, in 1962, Buffalo Bill Hawkins and J.G. Hawkins began a radio program in Eastland, Texas. And this was somewhat the start of their ministering together in preaching the word of Yahweh. Now, from the 13th book of Yisrayl, part 1, page 212, verse 35, Pastor writes, he says, the word Pentecost, count 50, 1 day for a year, which is the prophetic time schedule he pointed out in this very book of Israel here in this sermon. He says 1 day for a year, Yeketskia 4:6, okay, where he brings about the Feast of Harvest. And so 50 years, you add 50 years to 1962, and I've listed here the completion of the testimony of the two witnesses. This is when, Pastor had written the books. The Nuclear Baby book was the last major book that Pastor wrote. And so this is a time period which Revelation is referring to when they've completed their testimony. And then also, I note that if you look at the events, the history of the House of Yahweh, right around 2012, beginning of the great signs from heaven, 2012, the beginning of the gold, then the purple time period. These things began then. And I've listed here at the beginning of the harvest time. Okay? Now, so then, look at the bottom event there on your monitors. So, when they've completed their testimony, in 2013, the son of perdition, Pope Francis, takes office. March 19th, 2013, Pope Francis begins his character assassination of the two witnesses to destroy their reputations, and this battle is going to go on for 42 months. Let's go on to the next slide. And I'm going to read. Revelations 11 verse 7 is on your monitor now. It's Revelations 11 verse 7. And when they, this is the witnesses, shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. Now, We know that Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, Yahweh's spokesman, has promised protection. The waters shall not overflow him. But this is talking about destroying his reputation, destroying his character, destroying the credibility of what the House of Yahweh teaches. This is the war against holiness. And if you look at, on that same slide, the Revelation 17, verse 8, it says, "The beast which thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition." Now this is specifically talking about Pope Francis. He's the last of the line of the popes. He's the one who will go into ruination. That his office will be taken away from him. "And they that dwell in the heavens shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the earth." Francis is very popular among many people in the world, not just Catholics. They give him a lot of honor. He's quite popular. But it's a deceptive type of teaching that he brings forth, of course. "When they behold the beast that was," Francis was prophesied to come. The son of perdition was prophesied to come. He's not of quite the same character as the previous kings of the Catholic Church since the Lateran Treaty of 1929, and yet he is listed as one of the kings. He's the 8th since the Lateran Treaty of 1929. Okay, so in Revelation 11:7, "This beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit shall overcome these witnesses and kill them." So let's look at the next slide here on character assassination. Now, Pastor, when he spoke about 6 months ago on 11/8/2014, he just made a statement. He didn't explain it at the time, but he said, "Pope Francis is assassinating Yisrayl Hawkins' character." Those were his words. Pope Francis is assassinating Yisrayl Hawkins' character. Okay, so if you look at the slide on character assassination here, what is it? Character assassination is the deliberate and sustained process that aims to destroy the credibility and the reputation of a person, institution, social group. So destroy the character, the credibility of the witness Yisrayl in the House of Yahweh. Agents of character assassination employ a mix of open and covert methods to achieve their goals, such as false accusations, planting and fostering rumors, and manipulating information. Character assassination is the attempt to tarnish a person's reputation. It may involve exaggeration, misleading half-truths, or manipulation of the facts to present an untrue picture of the targeted person. It is a form of defamation and can be a form of ad hominem argument. And so this definition continues here in the next slide. It says an ad hominem argument means responding to arguments by attacking a person's character, not his message, but attacking his character rather than the content of his argument, of their argument. For living individuals, such as Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, Yahweh's last days witness, targeted by character assassination attempts, this may result in being rejected by their community, family, or members of their living or work environment. Such acts are often difficult to reverse or rectify once the thought is planted in people's minds, and the process is likened to a literal assassination of a human life. As Revelation 11 says, will overcome them and kill them. So literal assassination of a human life. The damage sustained can last a lifetime, or for historical figures, such as the witness Jacob, who passed away in 1991. He's buried underground in a cemetery in Odessa, Texas. This assassination of character can last for many centuries after their death. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to mention regarding the over completing their testimony, also from the 13th book of Israel, part 1, page 212, verse 36. Pastor says, by Pentecost, you start harvesting the fruit and getting it ready to take to Yahweh's house so you can share that fruit with others. That food, so there'll be food in my house, his words. Now this is the first fruit, Yeshua our high priest, the first fruit, and we're coming into the image of our high priest Yeshua in righteousness, in the image of Yahweh. And Pastor continues, now put that together with people and you will understand 50 days, the 50 years, he says, the 50 years. Okay? And that's, so, now getting back to the character assassination of the witnesses, from the Catholic News Agency, this was October 31st, 2014, just a couple examples of how Pope Francis is assassinating the character of the witnesses. He writes, this way of, he says, they followed the law, going back to here, he states, the words of Pope Francis, Jesus' actions show that love and justice, not the excessive attachment to the laws, are the path to holiness, Pope Francis said. And he said, this way of life is being attached to the laws, distance the Pharisees from love and justice. So he's accusing the witnesses of not practicing love and justice. He says they followed the laws, they neglected love, and for these people Jesus had one word, hypocrites. So he's calling the witnesses hypocrites. Closed-minded men, Pope Francis continues, who are so attached to the laws, to the letter of the law, that they are always closing the door to hope, love, and salvation. Okay, so now he's accused the witnesses of closing the door to salvation. So this is truly a character assassination of the witnesses by Pope Francis. So, okay, continuing on here now. I'd like you to turn to Revelation 11, verse 9. Actually, verse 8. Revelation 11, verse 8. If we could have the next slide, we'll look at Revelation 11, verse 8 from the next slide here. Okay, so where is this character assassination coming from? In Revelation 11, verse 8, it says, and their dead bodies, and the word shall lie were added, this is the King James Version, in the streets of the great city. That's where this character assassination is coming from. From the streets of the great city, that great city, Revelation 17, verse 18, that great city that reigns over the kings of the earth, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. These are the words from the King James Version. Okay, but now look at the bottom, Revelation 11, verse 8. What it means is, and their dead bodies in the street of the great city, which is Rome. This is not speaking of Jerusalem, Israel. This is speaking of that great city, Rome, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, which is responsible. They are responsible for the death of Yeshua. The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, he was the highest authority. He gave the decision to allow Yeshua to be killed. The Roman soldiers carried out the execution of Yeshua. And in the middle were the Sanhedrin, the entire Sanhedrin, the temple priest, which, like Pastor Hawkins said, was taken by Titus to Rome. And what did, when Pontius Pilate said to the crowd, to the Sanhedrin, this man is innocent, their reply was, let his blood be upon our heads, and notice, our children. So they accepted the responsibility, and they passed it on to their children also. And you have the children of the Sanhedrin in authority in Rome to this day. So now let's go on to Revelation 11, verse 9. Revelation 11, verse 9. Let's look at it. If we could have the next slide. Revelation 11, verse 9. Okay, this is from the King James Version. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not, and this is 3.5 years, one day for a year, just as the prophet Yekeskia said in 4:6, one day for a year, 1 year for a day, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. Okay, so let's look at these words. First of all, the definition of these words, and they of the people. If we could have the next slide. And they of the people in kindreds and tongues and nations. So this they of, this is the Greek word 1537, they of. It means denoting origin. In other words, where did they come from? Where did these they of people come from? And it answers it here. The point whence motion or action proceeds from, out from, of place, time, the out among. So this is speaking of Yahweh's called out ones. They of the nations. We were formerly of the nations. We've come out of the nations. They of the nations and kindreds and tongues. So this Revelation 11 verse 9 is speaking about us. Yahweh's house and those who hear the message and agree with the message and support the witness. They shall see their dead bodies. In other words, the called out ones are going to recognize what's going on. They're going to understand the character assassination of the witness and the war against holiness. And this is going to go on for 3.5 years. And they shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in the grave. No, Yahweh's people will not allow the message, the pouring out of the golden oil, to cease. And that's what this means. We're going to do everything we can possibly do to promote this work and to lift up the hands of the witness. So the word suffer, shall not suffer, it means will not permit. Will not permit. Has nothing to do with suffering. It means will not permit the work to stop. And the word graves, it means remembrance. In other words, keeping the work going under, of course, tethered to the branch, but doing everything we can to build up the house of Yahweh. The word, it's keep it in mind. The word graves, it's from 34:15. It's 34:18 from word 34:15. The idea of fixture of the mind or a mental grasp to bear in mind. Remembrance. Keep the work of Yahweh in remembrance, and in fact promoting the work of Yahweh. So if you would, and if you turn in your books of Yahweh to Matthew 24, verse 42. 21:42. Matthew 21:42. They of the people, and they of the people. This is the called out ones. This is us, assembled here for the feast, and all those who couldn't be here and desire to be part of the work of Yahweh forever. So they of the people. And Yeshua spoke about us in Matthew 21, verse 42, when he said, Yeshua said to them, have you never read the scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected, speaking of Yeshua, has become the headstone of the corner. This is Yahweh's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. Now look at verse 43. Speaking of us here, they of the nations, they who came out from among the nations, Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of Yahweh will be taken from you," he's speaking to the Pharisees, "and given to a people of the same habit, but from a foreign land," right here in the chief of the nations, "and they will bring forth the fruits of it." Yes, the fruits of righteousness. So this out from the people is speaking of Yahweh's called out ones. Let's go on to, and the other, also I'd like you to turn to Exodus chapter 17 and verse 12. Exodus chapter 17 verse 12. In Revelation 11 verse 9 here, where it says we will not suffer, let me see here. "Shall see their dead bodies 3 days and 3 years and a half, and shall not suffer, or not permit their dead bodies to be put in the grave." I thought Exodus chapter 17 verse 12 was appropriate for defining what we need to do. Exodus 17 verse 12, "But Moshe's hands became heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur then supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun." So we're holding up the arms of Yahweh's last day's witness. This is what it means, that we're not going to allow the attacks of the adversary to deter this work in any way. We're going to lift up the arms of the witness in any way possible. And it's in verse 10 here, we're going to read verse 10, it shows us how it's possible. So let's go on to Revelation 11 verse 10. Revelation 11 verse 10. So if we could have that slide, please. Revelation 11 verse 10. This is the King James Version. We'll read the Book of Yahweh version a little bit later. Revelation 11 verse 10. "And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice." So this is us, okay? This is us, those who recognize Yahweh's plan, shall rejoice. What is Pastor? What did he talk about at Yeshua's memorial? Rejoicing, despite the hurting at times. Rejoice. Rejoice over them. Rejoice over the witnesses. We're not rejoicing in their demise. We're rejoicing in their success in preaching the message of Yahweh and in Yahweh's plan coming to completion. "And make merry, and shall send gifts one to another." These are not unrighteous gifts. Send gifts one to another, because these two witnesses tormented them that dwelt on the earth. Okay, well, let's look at some of these words here. The definition of "they that dwell," it means to house permanently. I believe this "they that dwell," it's speaking of every person on the face of the earth. It's speaking of us. It's speaking of those who are hearing the word, not doing anything about it or recognizing that it's from Yahweh. But "they that dwell on the earth," it says from 36:11, to occupy a house, that is, reside, remain in the house of Yahweh. Okay, then if we look at the next slide, the word "rejoice" here, to be full of cheer. That is, to be calmly joyful, well off. And notice the next part here. It says, especially as a salutation or a meeting on parting. Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Yahweh bless you and keep you. These are salutations of uplifting among each other. We're going to rejoice and we're going to lift each other up. And make merry. This it means be in a great frame of mind. Rejoice, despite the hurting at times, despite the hurting. And notice this next part here. Revelation 11 verse 10, "And they shall send gifts to one another." The word "gifts," it's Greek word 1435, And it means, yes, it means a present, but it also means a sacrifice. It means an offering, a sacrifice, an offering. You know, we all have, and notice what Romans 12 verse 6 says about this. We then having gifts differing, we're all different, but yet we all have the same goal. We then having gifts differing according to the conformity of the faith which is given to us. You know, we're all blessed in different ways. And that last word there, this gift spoken of here is the attitude of servitude. So pencil that in. If you have a King James Version, pencil that in under gifts in Revelation 11 verse 10. It's the attitude of servitude, serving one another. Okay, so going on to, and the other thing about this rejoicing, Deuteronomy 12 verse 5. Deuteronomy 12 verse 5. But you are to seek the habitation of your father, the house of Yahweh, the place which Yahweh your father shall choose out from all your tribes to establish his name, and there you must go. Here we are, the established house of Yahweh under the witnesses and the spokesman, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins. And look at verse 12 of Deuteronomy chapter 7. There in front of Yahweh, your father, you and your family shall eat, and you shall rejoice. It's a command that we rejoice in all that you have put your hand to do, because Yahweh your father has blessed you with the knowledge of his house and his plan. That's the blessing. That's the blessing, that we're included in Yahweh's plan. He recognizes us and he includes us in his plan. So performing a work duty, for example, performing a work task in the house of Yahweh is a form of a gift, an offering or sacrifice that is performed for the benefit of the plan of Yahweh. This is the attitude of servitude, whether it's milking the goats, milking the cows, sewing holy garments, working in the office, working in the food preparation in the cafeteria, whatever your job is. This is what we do for each other. This is our attitude of servitude. So these are just some examples. You plug in your work detail, guarding the gate. You plug in what you do to build the house of Yahweh, and pray that Yahweh blesses you with the ability to serve him and to serve him more abundantly. So now let's go on to this word here in the King James Version, tormented. This is an interesting word. This is what the witnesses are said they would torment the inhabitants of the earth. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. It's up on the monitor. Tormented. They translate it to torture, but that's really not the correct definition of the word. It comes from Greek word 931. And it means a touchstone. It means a touchstone. And before we go to the definition of touchstone, let's look at where that word comes from. If you look, we heard about running the race with endurance. Greek word 939, it says to walk a pace. You know, get yourself into the groove in a pace that you can handle and prepare to serve Yahweh forever. That's what this means. To walk a pace, that is by implication the foot. Okay? Run the race with endurance. It's contained in this word tormented. Okay, so now let's look at the word touchstone. If we could have the next slide here. Touchstone. This is from Wikipedia. It says, a stone used to identify precious metals, going for the gold. You know, Yahweh's called out ones. It's a means of assaying the relative merits of a concept. Touchstone, something that is used to make judgments about the quality of other things. The full definition of touchstone, it's a black siliceous stone related to flint and formerly used to test the purity of gold. So it's a test. It's a test. That's what this is. That's what the witnesses are doing. They're testing. They're testing you. They're testing me. They're testing every inhabitant of the earth with the golden oil. So, continuing here, used to test the purity of gold and silver by the streak left on the stone when rubbed by the metal. So you take a piece of gold, you rub it against this stone, and it's going to leave a mark. And somebody who is familiar with the type of test and the results, how to read the test, they can tell you the quality of that gold, whether it's pure or whether it needs a little refining yet. So it's a test or criteria for determining the quality or genuineness of a thing. Synonyms, in other words, words that mean the same thing as touchstone. It's a benchmark, criterion, the gold standard. It is the gold standard. Yahweh's 613 laws are the gold standard of the universe. So let's see what Bollinger has to say about it. Critical Lexicon by Bollinger. Critical Lexicon, if could have the next slide, please. Critical Lexicon by Bollinger, first sound of printing, 1975. Torment. It says to rub with the touchstone. This is what the witness is doing. To rub with the touchstone, to put to the test, prove, to examine closely, to cross-question. And what I've got written in red there on the slide, a later definition of this word was by applying torture, to torture, the rack. So I think Satan tried to hide the definition of this word by throwing in the word torture. But so anyway, then torment as a noun, it means a touchstone. The ancient lapis lazuli for trying metals, on which when gold is rubbed, it leaves a peculiar mark. Hence, examination, trial, inquiry. This is what the golden oil that we hear from the witness Yisrayl, that's what it does with each individual. Okay, now let's look at the next slide here. This is the book of Yahweh translation, and it's Revelation 11 verse 10 from the book of Yahweh. Those residing throughout the earth will observe Yahweh's feast in reverence for Yahweh because of the witnesses, for they have a mind of understanding. Speaking of us, okay, we see what Yahweh is doing through the two witnesses, to do that which is right, and Yahweh's tithes and offerings. This is part of the gifts we bring to Yahweh. It's His tithe. It's not a gift from us. It's His tithe. But this is what part of the attitude of servitude, obeying Yahweh's 613 laws, and Yahweh's tithes and offerings. They will be sold together, who are of Yahweh, because these two prophets proclaimed the every word of Yahweh, the law and the prophets, to those residing through the earth. So this is exactly what the King James Version used the word torment to throw us off. But this is what we're doing here. And if we could have the last slide here. These are some of just a comparison. Rejoice and make merry in the King James Version. Book of Yahweh, will observe Yahweh's feast in the reverence for Yahweh, and rejoicing. Rejoicing. We'll make merry. Speaking of us, it's not those who don't recognize what's going on. And send gifts to one another. Yahweh's tithes and offerings they will bestow, but it's the attitude, also the attitude of servitude. This is how we do this, fulfill this prophecy here that Yeshua gave. Because these two prophets tormented, these two prophets proclaimed the every word of Yahweh, the 613 laws, the gold standard, the golden oil, the laws of the touchstone government of the universe. Yahweh's 613 laws, the ones that Pope Francis says they're done away with. So that is the battle that's in the earth. I'd just like to conclude here with Exodus chapter 20, Exodus 20:20. And if we could go back to that one slide that showed Pope Francis, I think I skipped right over that in the sermon here. But if we could go back to that, where we were talking about these attacks that are coming against the witnesses, they come from that great city. And this picture here, this is a picture from the October 2015 Catholic calendar, or one of them. And there's the one who's bringing these attacks against Yahweh's house and Yahweh's witnesses. And you see at the top of his hand there, the Egyptian obelisk in the center of Vatican Square. Might be a little bit difficult to see, but that's part of Egypt. Helps to identify him as Egypt. And between his glasses there and his right hand, the Christmas tree. Is that a surprise? No, it's not a surprise. The Christmas tree and the obelisk. Sodom and Egypt. Right there on their own literature. So, okay, if you could turn to Exodus chapter 20:20. Exodus chapter 20:20. Moshe said to the people, "Do not fear, for Yahweh has come to test and prove you." You know, this is being rubbed against the touchstone of Yahweh's laws. This is the test that the witness brings forth. He tells us what Yahweh's laws are, and so we're rubbed up against his words. Do not fear, Moshe said to the people, "Do not fear, for Yahweh has come to test and prove you, so that the reverence of Yahweh will be with you, so that you do not commit sin." That's the goal, to overcome sin. And then in Hebrews 12, verse 9, the words of Yeshua, as pastors taught us, Hebrews 12, verse 9. "Furthermore, we had fleshly fathers who corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Should we not even more be subject to Father Yahweh and live?" You know, this is the words of the witness in these last days. For verse 10 of Hebrews chapter 12, For they truly chastened us for a few days as they thought best, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. That's the end result, being partakers of Yahweh's holiness. Now, no chastening, so this being rubbed up against the touchstone of Yahweh's laws. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful at the present time, but grievous at times. Nevertheless, after we overcome any shortcomings in our life, afterward it produces the peaceable fruit of righteousness, that is, for those who have been trained by it. So, brethren, you see what the witnesses are doing? We see that the two witnesses, and particular Yahweh's spokesman, the witness Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, is fulfilling every word that the prophets and Yeshua said that he would do. And we should all rejoice in that. So, with that, if you'd all please stand. May Yahweh bless your understanding. At this time, it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you our next speaker, the great Kohan Benjamin Krause Hawkins.
Shalom, saints of Yahweh. What a beautiful day. You may be seated. I've got to tell you in advance, what we got in store for you right now is a triple portion of what we've all received thus far. So get your plates and forks and spoons, your pencils, paper, your books of Yahweh, and we've just really got some really, really fantastic stuff here. I want to get everything organized so I don't... Of course, may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to be talking about numbers again. Uh-oh, did I hear the... Okay, great. You know, numbers in Yahweh's plan are very, very important. You know, and counting. You know, today, what day of the Omar we said it was? Wow, we can count to 4 now that we came to Yahweh's house, right? Woo! You should be excited. Yahweh's teaching us to count, okay? Now, if you could turn over, all of us, to Psalm 90. Psalm 90. Psalm 90. We're going to look at verse 12. I had everything. There it is right there. Let's look at verse 12. On page 470 it says, "So teach us, Yahweh, to number our days, so we might gain the heart of wisdom." Now, let's turn over to Daniel. No, we don't need to turn to Daniel. I'll just tell you that Daniel was a very wise man, was he not? And Daniel understood by books the number of years of the Babylonian captivity. Of course, he didn't go down to Barnes & Noble and buy some Christian book to try to understand it, right? What did he use? The writings, the laws, and the prophecies, right? Of Jeremiah, actually. It names the book of Jeremiah is how he came to that understanding. Turn to Revelation 13:18, talking about counting, okay? And the importance of counting or calculating. Calculating. Revelation 13, verse 18, where it says on page 979, "Here is wisdom. Let him who understands count," or in the King James Version says, "calculate the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And we all know who that is. Let's go over now. Well, let's not do that. Let me just tell you that if you want to be fruitful in Yahweh's house, you need to multiply. Oh, come on, there's no Matthews out here. Oh, that's right, you're all Matithias, I'm sorry. If you want to be fruitful in the house of Yahweh, you must learn to multiply. That's supposed to be, you're supposed to laugh or something. Oh, great, okay, great. I think that's in Genesis 1:28. But you don't add or subtract either. Remember Deuteronomy 4:2? And there should be no division among the body. That's a joke, if you didn't know. That's in 1 Corinthians 12:25 for your notes. Okay, so we're talking about counting and math and all these things, but now I'm going to get into some really odd. Well, before I even get into my sermon, I want to touch on some things that I missed the other day, and I'm going to tell you, Yahweh inspires every single thing in this great work. Okay, even when you're standing up here, of course, between the two cherubim, Yahweh inspires certain things. You know, like the proverb says, he says, you know, the plans are in the minds of a man, but Yahweh directs those steps. Yahweh is in complete control of his plan in these last days, down to the minutest detail. Now, if y'all remember the other day, I told you that Pastor relayed to me, he received a phone call, and it was, he thought it was 6:13, but it was actually 6:15 on his phone. He looked on his phone, and that's what he saw. And I stood up here the other day, and I kind of gave you a rough definition of 6:15 because, truthfully, I did not have the definition in front of me, and my mind went blank. I just kind of gave you a rough definition because I couldn't find my notes. Well, there was a reason for that you're going to learn here in a few minutes. It's going to astound you, okay? Now, but I got it today, okay? I brought it with me today. Let's see. And then the next day, let me tell you this. The following day, one of the great sons of Israel, Abel, was up here doing closing prayer, and he relayed to me afterwards. He says, you know, my mind kind of went blank. I was going to say more in my prayer, but something came over me, and I just closed it. Well, you're going to find what came over him, and you're going to see how Yahweh inspires every detail in this house. Now, Strong's, if we can have the first slide, please. All right. Strong's number 615. It means, it's from 631. I've got some of those things underlined, and it means bound. That's all you need to know for now. Let's go to the second slide. That's 631. I want to go over some definitions here with you. It means to yoke or hitch. By analogy, to fasten in any sense. To join the battle, to bind, fast, harness. Harness. Y'all remember? Harness, hold, keep, make ready, like make ready the Passover. Remember, the Passover had not began when this was 615. This is before the Passover. It also means order, as in Seder. Did you know the word Seder means order? Y'all knew that, right? Pastor taught us that. That's the importance of these words, to remember them. And it means to put in bonds, you know, those bands of love that we're drawn with, the cords of love, the 613 laws. Those are just some of the definitions, but harness, to bind with cords. That should remind you of Yahweh's harvest song. Okay, that, you know, when you see the farmer making harness ready, what's the other part? Come on, help me out about the mules. Mules from pastures, putting them together, binding them together, tying them together, right? To work and doing this work, okay? Now, let me show you this picture again, by the way, because the other day I showed it up on the screen, and it was kind of hard to see, I think, for some people. But let me start out by showing you this one, because I want to show you that it was a double rainbow. You can barely see the second one, but you see the arch right here, and you see Pastor up here in the very middle. Now, an amazing thing took place. That first rainbow disappeared. Like you see, it's disappearing right now. And an amazing thing took place. His face dropped down to the first one, right in the center of that first rainbow, okay? Now, I want to zoom in on it a little bit. And you can make out right here, there's the microphone, and there's Pastor. You see the reading glasses. Remember the familiar glasses you'll always see in pictures. And that is exactly how he was up here on Seder night. Okay? Y'all remember what I told you about. We had a pastor. I don't want to get into all those other definitions because I've already gone over that. But isn't that amazing? You know, right before Passover, the Seder meal, harnessing the harvest time. This is so awesome. We should just be, you know, Yahweh gives us so much, you know. And just when you think he can't give you any more, he pours out even more. It's just amazing. Now, watch this. Here's interesting. The women in the House of Yahweh gave an awesome sermon yesterday, did they not? The young children and the women. And by the way, I want to add to their presentation. I want to thank Israel Hawkins for teaching me to count, okay? I want to thank you, Israel Hawkins, for teaching all of us to count, because when we come up here and we give this to you, it's teaching you to count as well. Yahweh wants all of us to have wisdom in using these numbers and these words, and always remember all of it's brought for a purpose. It's for our learning. It's for our teaching, our edification. So services on the women's, the day before that, the missionary team spoke, and we did the sprinkling afterwards. I was standing in the back of the sanctuary, and I always take my iPhone out during sprinkling. And when the sprinkling's over and the prayer's over, I look at my iPhone. It's the most accurate time I have, okay? Services ended at 12:51 p.m. on the day the missionary team spoke. The following day, on 4/8, that was 4/7, by the way. On 4/8, the women spoke. Guess what time they ended? Exactly 12:51. Exactly. And I have witnesses right here, sons of Israel Abel and some deacons. that I had that number written on a piece of paper, I had my iPhone in my hand, and I told them, watch. They looked at the paper, they saw 1251 was already written on it. When the great deacon, or great son of Israel Abel finished his prayer, boom, 1251. Was already written on the paper. Now, let me tell you what that means. You're going to be amazed. Can I have my next slide? 1251, it's the Hebrew word bar, and it's only used 8 times in all your holy scriptures in the book of Daniel when you see the word field. Like Nebuchadnezzar went out in the field eating grass, so on and so forth. It's used 8 times in the book of Daniel. That's significant. That number 8, you're going to learn later. But it means field. Can you go? And it's from the word, it's the word bar. Can you go to the next slide? From 1250. In 1250, it means, it's from barar, and it means in the sense of winnowing. Winnowing, okay? Keep that in your mind. Grain of any kind, even while standing in the field. By extension, the open country, and it means wheat. 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 Hello? I mean, shalom. Wheat. Now, with that in mind for a moment, let's turn over to Matithia chapter 3. Matithia chapter 3. We're going to look at verse 12 when you get there. Matithia 3, I'll give you a page number. It's found on page 729. And I'm going to start in verse 11. And this is Yochanan the Immerser speaking. He says, yes, I baptize you with water for repentance, but he who comes after me is mightier than me, whose sandals I'm not worthy to carry. He will either baptize you with Spirit Holy or with fire. His winnowing shovel is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and gather his wheat into the storehouse, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. Now let's turn to Jeremiah 51:2. 51:2, 512, right? Jeremiah 51, keep that number in your mind too. You're going to hear a lot about that today. Jeremiah 51:2. I'll give you a page number when I get there. 51:2 on page 617. And it says, and I will send winnowers to Babylon, who will winnow her and empty her land. They will attack her on every side in the day of destruction. I'm not going any further than that. I'm going to leave it there. Remember wheat and winnowing. Can I have my next slide? It's from 1305, by the way. 1305 is up there for you to look at. And notice what 1305 means. It means to purify. Now, you just read that in Matithia 3. It says he will thoroughly purge his floor. Purge, select. Purify, select. Remember what the great Khan Shaul told us a few days ago about that going through the 13 of the sieve and the finest flour coming out? That selection that's going to be made, the separation. It also means choice, chosen, cleanse, pure you show. Pure you show. You know, the pure, purple, purge, purify, show yourself pure, tested. Tested. Like the great Kohan David just told you, okay? We're being purified through the testing, right? Okay, so isn't that amazing? Isn't that not amazing, House of Yahweh? You know, both days talk about unity. Talk about unity. I'll tell you, that is really something. Now I got to get on to my sermon. And I know some of you might be counting the clock and thinking you might be out of here by 11:30. Well, I got news for you. It might be a little bit over, but praise Yahweh, right? Count it all joy. Since we're counting, right? Okay, so I need to do a little review. So if you can show the next slide. If y'all remember how all this started on the number 217 in Revelation. In fact, turn over to Revelation 217. You can take the slide off just for a moment. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. But turn over to Revelation 217 real quick. Because I got to remind you, I got to remind you what we learned in the last lesson, or last few lessons, about number 217. All this started with, of course, the white stone. Remember the numbers on Pastor's stone? The white stone, 17, 28, and 74. And on 217 of this year, we saw the Pastor's face on Mars. And that kind of sparked this deal with Revelation 2:17, and the great Kohan David Heimerman got up here and showed when you count 74 days from 2:17, you come up with Revelation 5:12. All this is done totally under inspiration of Yahweh, totally under inspiration of Yahweh. And but I want to show you that calendar to familiarize you with it again. If you can go ahead and show the slide now. Remember 2:17, and then 2:28 we gave another sermon, and but we showed how when you counted, you could start your count from of course 2:17, but when you count 74, you can do it two ways. Okay, now follow me on this. I need everyone to really pay attention so you get it this time, because some people, I don't think they caught it last time, but in doing your count, of course, you have 17, Revelation 2:17, and then Revelation 2:28, remember, talked about the overcoming, he who overcomes. And then if you start from 28, can you go to the next slide? You start from 28, and you count 74. Of course, the 31st of the next month would be the 59th day. That's, what's that, March, okay? Go to the next slide. And then April 15th would be the 74th day, okay? Now, what was the significance of that? What was that? What was that all about? Was it because your taxes were due on April 15th? Well, that was a great way to remind us, right? Because Yahshua said to pay our taxes, right? Okay? But that's not what that was about. Can you go to the next slide? The reason that was significant, April 15th, was because on the second Roman month, the February calendar of this year, Pastor had a quotation at the bottom of it. And it said, "How do you overcome? You do what the priests at the house of Yahweh, where Yahweh says, I will choose to place my name in the last days. You do what they teach you to do, humbly, without going to the right or to the left. That's what you're told to do, and that is what brings you to this overcoming." And it says, Overseer Yisrayl Hawkins, 4:15:14. Now that was interesting because it was exactly 1 year later from 4:15:14, or 4:15:14 is where that 70, or 15 is where that 74 landed. So exactly 1 year earlier, this quote came out. Well, let's go to that quote. Let's go to the next slide. Where did that quote come from? It came from this, let's see, this is the 14th book of Israel, chapter 10, okay? And it's from the sermon on 4:15:14. And it says, notice the verse number. It's 37. It's verse 37. Keep that in your mind, because on our next count that I'm going to show you, you're going to see how Yahweh is inspiring this. But this is the quote that was on the calendar. It's verse 37 in that sermon, okay? Everybody's got that? All right. Let's go to the next slide and show you the next count, how you can count 74 from 28. So if you start from sundown on the 28th of February of 2015, and you count 74, let's go to the next slide. You'll see the 32nd day is on the 31st of the Roman month of March 2015. That's your 32nd day. Go to the next slide, please. You keep counting, and you go up to April 30th. You're at the 62nd day. Can I have the next slide? The 74th day is the 12th, 5/12, and it's the Omer number 37. Omer 37. Does everybody have that now? Can I hear you? I can't hear you. I can only hear this side. Okay, we're a little slower over here, I think, but we'll get it, right? Okay, so everybody's clear on that. Let me see where I'm going to go now. Okay, now, all right. Now, 5:12, I want you to keep that in your mind. Let's go to Revelation 5:12. That's a great place to start here. Revelation, just a couple pages over. Revelation 5:12, found on page 974. And it says, saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. You count 7 things there, right? But that word power and that word glory, I want you to particularly pay attention to during this sermon, okay? Okay, now, if you look at the footnote there for number 12, 5:12, there's a footnote. It says footnote 3. Look down at the bottom at footnote 3. It says verse 5:12, sermon tape 3693. Okay? So what would be the logical thing to do in that case? Should we just go, oh, that's an old sermon, I want to go back and listen to that, and that's old news. Right? No. Did you ever notice when you're reading the books of Israel, I don't care how far you go back, or any literature in the House of Yahweh, it always is like fresh and new. You're never going to be able to say, none of us are ever going to be able to say, we don't need that anymore. This is forever. What Yahweh does is forever. It's forever. It ain't going away. Okay, so the logical thing to do is go to that sermon and read it to see what we can find, right? Well, let's go there and let's find this. You think devil worship was shocking facts? I know I used to hand that book out, or I used to hand out a flyer that said devil worship, the shocking facts, doing reach out. And everybody would, why are you teaching us devil worship? I don't want that on my door. And I'm like, no, it's not teaching devil worship. It's a book about devil worship. They really got the shock of their lives, too. I got one, too, because I got chased down a few times, me and some other deacons. Okay, so anyway, can I go to the next slide, please? I want to show you the front of this. This is from the second book of Israel, by the way. The second book of Israel, going on to perfection, number 18. And the title is, lo and behold, the power of death, taken from Satan and given to the sons of Yahweh through Yeshua's death, the power to give life. The power to give life. Now, this sermon was on 3/6/93. 3 plus 6 and 9 plus 3 is 21. 7, 7, 7. Oh, no division, right? We can't do division. I better not do that one. No, I'll do it. Okay, 3693 divided by 17 is 217. Revelation 2:17? Yeah, you can clap. You're clapping for Yahweh. You're not clapping for me. Okay, so notice this sermon is on page 153 of the second book, and 153 divided by 17 is 9. What would be the odds of that? So in this sermon, Pastor gives a definition of the word power. And I have that book up here with me. And I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to put that slide up so you can see it. Can I have that next slide showing the definition of the word power? Let me get to it here so I can add a little bit to it from here too as well. But it means, it's from Strong's 1849 and 1832, and it means miraculous power and ability. And this is from the sermon. I'm taking these definitions straight from the book of Israel, okay? So you really need to write these down. Miraculous power and ability, privilege, force. Don't get force as in the worldly kind of force in your mind, but the force like you're able to move mountains. Or the force like you're able to use electricity at will. Like you're able to do these miraculous things like Yeshua did, using the microorganisms. capacity. Remember your brain. I'm talking about that subconscious mind too, okay? Bear all this in mind, okay? Abundance, might, a worker of miracles, strength, violence, force, great domination or dominion, supreme authority, sovereignty, and order of the angles. That's not quite right. I think that might be order of the angels. This is just from the Strongs, okay? That means you're going to have rulership over the Malachim. You're going to be teaching the Malachim, guiding them, and so on and so forth. Remember, we're made a little lower than the Malachim now, okay? But we are going to judge Malachim, as the great apostle Shaul showed you, and as our great overseers taught. And absolute ownership, absolute ownership. Now, that's all just in that word power, okay? And let's keep reading, because he talked about potential. And the word potential means, this is in the sermon, by the way. This is from page 154 in the book of Israel, second book of Israel. Potential means suitability for holding or storing or accumulating. You see this right up here? This is your most valuable tool. Right here. Without this, you got nothing. The body and the mind, remember, they don't work without each other. You don't have this, the body, you ain't going to have nothing. Okay, so your mind has to be suitable for holding or storing and accumulating knowledge. Pastor talked about that in the There Is Someone Out There. He talked about the subconscious mind and the, what do you call it? Great human potential. He says your mind, the greatest computers in the world can't even hold they're not like a grain of sand compared to your mind and the power of the subconscious mind. And he talked about that on page 107, 137, and 151. And There Is Someone Out There. There's that 37 again, 137 and 151. Remember, 51 divided by 17 goes 3 times. He talked about that in this sermon, or in this book, There Is Someone Out There, which you can acquire right now down at the Men's South office. Not right now, but as soon as I leave here. Don't go there now. Stay here. And he also mentioned the word competency. Remember, these are all words from this word power. And it means the use of the subconscious mind, superhuman, freedom, magistrate. When you see freedom, think of liberty. And when you think of liberty, don't think of the Statue of Liberty or the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. It's cracked, man. It's cracked, okay? Think of Jubilee. Think of Pentecost. Think of freedom to keep the laws of Yahweh. Because we walk at liberty because we keep Yahweh's precepts, right? Psalm 119, which, by the way, when you add up 17, 28, and 74, you get 119. Remember, we're learning to count, right? Sesame Street is not the place to teach your children to count. They need to count here at the House of Yahweh. They need to learn how to count. It's the only place you can learn to count. Truly learn to count. Now, potentate, that's another word he used here in this sermon. You're going to have to read this sermon. It's really awesome. It means ruler or sovereign, one who wields great power and sway, token of control. Did you know that Satan has control of the minds of the world at this time? Did you know you're going to have that? Did you know that? Pastor told you in this sermon, you are going to have the power to open the minds of a person, to open their mind, to help them to understand the words of life. Did you know that Pastor even taught that we, in this sermon here, we will have life within ourselves to give? Did you know that? We will have the power to grant life. Now, that doesn't mean, well, before you start thinking that, I know none of you are thinking this, but before you start thinking, all right, I'm going to go raise my dead Uncle Joe. He wasn't even in the house of Yahweh, but I sure miss him. Oh, no, you're going to be like that. Yahweh's going to make absolutely certain that we will consider That we will consider. We will stop, think, and consider before we do anything, because you're going to have great, great, great power. And it means delegated influence and authority, liberty, jurisdiction, power, right, and strength. And that's all just in that word power right there. Go to Genesis 1:26. Genesis 1:26. Everybody should know where that is. I hope. I don't even think it has a page number. It's so obvious. Yeah, it doesn't have a page number. But it's on page 1. That's easy, yes. Out of the mouths of babes. That's easy. Okay, so Genesis 1:26. Because remember that word power in Revelation 5:12 that means authority, among other things. It says, and Yahweh, or Genesis 1:26, then Yahweh said, I will make man in my image, or according to my character. That word image, you know, when you look in a mirror, what do you see? You see yourself reflecting, right? Okay? Remember, Yahshua was the reflection of perfection. Like when you look in that mirror of the laws of Yahweh, right? He wasn't a double-minded man. He could look in that mirror of the laws of Yahweh and he saw Yahweh reflecting back because he kept those 613 laws perfectly. He was the reflection of perfection. He showed us how to keep Yahweh's laws perfectly. Yes, you can clap for Yahshua Messiah, our great high priest. Okay, he says, I will make man in my image according to my likeness. Let's look at this word likeness. It says, they will have rulership over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. Now, we need to look at side note. Can you go to my next slide? We're going to look at side note F. If everybody could look over to side note F. Off to the side there. It's word number 18. That word likeness is word number 1819 and 1823, and it means consider. You've heard a lot about that word this feast, haven't we? It means consider, compare, think, use similitudes. You know, or comparing one thing with another. Or as the great apostle Shaul said, comparing spiritual things with spiritual things. You know, remember when Yahshua spoke in parables? He would say, the kingdom of Yahweh is like a grain of mustard seed. The kingdom of Yahweh can be compared to, remember that? Remember how he always spoke in those ways? Did you know that you have that ability to do the same thing? Okay, a few of you do. Yahweh said he's going to give this to us. He's been giving it to us, and I'm going to show you how he's been doing it, and it is locked in here. And once it's released, we cannot even fathom. It has not even entered the mind of man what Yahweh has in store for us. These sufferings that we're going through at the present time are nothing and not even worthy to be compared with what Yahweh has in store for this house right here. And when I say this house right here, I mean everyone tuned in, everyone out there in the prisons that are desiring to be here at this time, whose hearts are with us today. I'm talking about everyone, the 2 billion that are out there. We are all going to be part of this. Now, let me finish this. Over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth, or everything with which the earth creeps, which the greatest teacher in the world has taught us is these microorganisms. Now, consider, compare, think, use similitudes. This is Yahweh's mind. This is what Yahweh does. Yahshua showed us how Yahweh was, did he not? When you look to Yahshua, you know, when it says look to Yahshua, did you know it means consider? That's what the word look to means. It's consider. Consider Yahshua. Look at his examples, and you'll see how we should be and how we're going to be. Go to the next slide, please. The word consider, it means to think about seriously. to regard, to believe after deliberation, or judge. Are you not training to be judges? What does a judge do? What does a righteous judge do? I'm not talking about the worldly judges. They're not righteous judges. But a true judge in Yahweh's house, they gather all the facts. Isn't that the first character trait we're taught? You gather all the facts, and then you just believe them, right? Whatever they told you? Oh, no. You have to make sure they're correct. You have to deliberate. And there's investigations, and there's this and that, and you got to know the laws of Yahweh to know how this actually goes down. It's not as simple as you think, but you know what? There's a proper procedure and a proper way everything is done in the house of Yahweh. And remember, judge nothing before it's time. Don't be looking at things that take place in the house of Yahweh with people and go, well, that person must have been doing this or that. We're fools if we think that way. Judge nothing before it's time. And don't judge to condemn another person. We all need to judge. We need to judge what to wear every day. We need to judge what we're eating. We need to judge whether our conduct is in line with the house of Yahweh. But by no means should we be judging to condemn anyone. Yahshua is the judge. Okay? Yahshua is the judge, and he will determine who lives and who dies at his coming, as the scripture says. Let's continue here. To take into account, to bear in mind. Now, I got to tell you, I was not talking to the great Kohan David about his sermon, but when I saw his definition of graves, remember graves? And he said it meant remembrance and bear in mind. Doesn't that bring the peaceful solution to your mind? The little bear there that says, bear this in mind. You know why? Because you bear Yahweh's glory here in your computer. You got to carry it here. This is your computer. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I'm going to show you who's bearing Yahweh's glory right now and who's teaching us to bear it in the right way. Because it's not just going to be given. This power will not just be given to anyone. And I'm talking about me too. We all have to qualify for this. It says to take into account, bear in mind, to show consideration. You know, one of the character traits in the peaceful solution is being considerate, having regard for another's feelings, having regard for another's office in the house of Yahweh. In fact, this morning, I showed that I still lack in my consideration. I'm working on it too. All of us, we need to be working on it, thinking about each other, thinking about each other's office, you know, thinking about how can we make it easier on that person in that office. Not how can we make it hard and complain, gripe and groan. I won't use the other words, you know what they are, but you don't even need to have those in your mind. But you know what I'm saying? Rejoice. Make it a joy for someone else. You know, everyone's struggling. Everyone's going through their own tests, right? But don't be a test to them. Make their in the men's speech class the other night, there was a man, I don't remember who it was, but a great brother that spoke up in the speech class, and he said he loves it. One of the great deacons was doing table topics, and he asked what he loved most about serving at the feast. And he said that he loved it when he gave someone their food and he saw their face, how it would light up. I find that same joy serving the people in my office. Yeah, I have my ups and downs, but you know what? I love it when people get what they need and we find a solution for them. But that's what people are wanting, is a solution. They're not wanting problems. They need a solution. The peaceful solution. Now it means to regard highly. Remember the word respect. It means to have high regard. And the great Khan Shaul told us that respect is like a foundation of this thing. Like self-control is the foundation for positive moral character. To look at thoughtfully, to think carefully, to reflect. And look at all the little, I took a few of these little things out of the peaceful solution, like think about it, right? Everywhere in the peaceful solution, you see these little these little boxes, and they say, think about it, bear this in mind, food for thought. You know, it's being put in your mind because these things you're going to be using throughout all eternity. Okay? Now, here's a few things to consider. Consider Yeshua, Hebrews 12, write these down, Hebrews 12, 2 and 3. And remember, looking to Yeshua means consider. Consider him. Consider what he went through. You know, if you do that, it sure makes your test seem a lot simpler. When you read what that man went through every step of the way, and yet his attitude was an attitude of servitude all the way. He was so busy taking care of the needs of others, he had to actually sneak away to pray. He had crowds following him everywhere, and he had to actually go and find time to do his prayer. He was literally surrounded with work, but he loved that work. He didn't say, oh man, this is too much, I can't handle it. You know, go away. You know, when I call a pastor on the phone, it's Kohan, Benjamin, Krause, Hawkins, Shalom. And I say, how you doing, pastor? That's like the stupidest question I think I've ever asked. Because he goes, well, I'm rejoicing. I'm super rejoicing. Which means I'm having a lot of problems. But you know what? I'm rejoicing in my tribulations. Like Yahweh told me to do. Now remember that word consider. Can I have my next slide? Please do not take this lightly. You know, stopping and considering is one of Yahweh's, it's Yahweh's likeness. This is what he's able to do. And he's sharing that with us. That's why he gave us the peaceful solution. That's why, remember, all these writings are inspired by Yahweh. They're given to us for our learning and growth to become just like Yahweh in his image and likeness. Okay, now, the word glory in this sermon, he also talked about glory in Revelation 5:12, the word glory. He talks about the same glory in this sermon from 3:693. Can I have the next slide? And glory is from Strong's 1380, and it means dignity, glory, honor, actual praise and worship. Remember, these are things that Yeshua and the house of Yahweh will receive, those found worthy. Truthful, truthfulness, or truthfully, to be accounted, pleased, to be repetitious, also righteous, faithful, true, believe, and think. Those are some of the definitions from Strong's. And it's from 1166, and it means to think or reason. You know, I know deer don't have the ability to reason. And I know rabbits don't, because every time I'm driving back or forth, it's like they see my headlights and they run right into them. And I'm like, hello, you didn't see me coming? I mean, and I feel horrible because I don't like hurting things, but it's like, hello, you didn't see it? But you know what? There's human beings that run right into the headlights. They put bongs in their mouth. They put chemicals in their veins. They put pork in their mouth. They jump on bungee cords from 2,000 feet. Like a rabbit, like a deer, right into the headlights. Remember, that's what we become when we don't take on the character, the likeness of Yahweh. We become like a beast, a brute beast that can't even reason. Now, glory. Who's going to bear this glory? Go to Zechariah 6. Zechariah 6. Zechariah 6:13. Zechariah 6:13 of all verses, right? First, we're going to read verse 12. It says, it's on page 719, I'm sorry. It says, speak to him and say, this is what Yahweh of hosts says, behold, the man whose name is the branch. Who's the branch, house of Yahweh? For Yisrayl Hawkins will branch out from his place, and he will build the house of Yahweh. Verse 13, yes, he will build the house of Yahweh. He will bear glory. Well, who was it that gave us the 613 law book over there and all the writings and the peaceful solution? Who bore that in his cranium up here? Was it me or you? You think Yahweh would give his glory to another that he has not chosen, that he has not sent? No, he just told you, my servant, the branch. And you know who the branch is. He says, behold, the man whose name is the branch, for he will branch out, he will build the house of Yahweh, he will bear glory, and he will sit and rule. That means teach and guide and instruct on his throne. He will be a priest upon his throne, and the council of peace will be between him and Yahshua. Everyone understands that. He's not going to kick Yahshua off his throne and sit on his throne. Okay? And when Yahshua says, he who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, he's not telling you, hey, bring your seat pad so you can sit with me on my chair. It's not talking about that, right? It's a position, a ministering position with power. As Isaiah 56:5 told you, right? He says, in fact, we're going to probably read that. But now, how are we going to get this glory? How are we going to obtain this power? It's by inheritance. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews chapter 1. By the way, it's now 11:33 and I'm going over, but I hope you all put up with me. Hebrews 11:1, because you still got a lot more surprises. Hebrews 11:1-4, Hebrews 1:4, found on page, it's not even, doesn't have page numbers, 941 to 943. It says, becoming so, this is speaking of Yahshua. In fact, let me read that, verse 3, because I did quote it to you a minute ago. It says, who being the reflection of the perfection of Yahweh and the representation of Yahweh's plan, by upholding all things concerning that which was spoken by Yahweh through the law and the prophets. Yes, Yahshua upheld every single law, and he stood for every prophecy of Yahweh, willing to give his life. He knew that he was looking forward to his death. His whole life. When he had purged sins, sat down on the right hand of Yahweh on high, becoming so much better than the Malachim, he has by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. But now, if you flip over to, or the same page at the bottom on 2:10, notice it's not just Yahshua here, okay? It says, for it was fitting for him, on account of whom are all things, and through whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to lead the prince of their salvation, Yahshua, to perfection through sufferings. Through sufferings. I don't want to miss anything. Also go to Isaiah 56. Isaiah 56, I'll give you a page number. Isaiah 56 on page 565. And it says, we'll start at verse 1. It says, 56:1, this is what Yahweh says, keep the judgments and do justly, for my salvation is near, soon to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man or the woman who does this, and the Son of Man who lays hold on it, who keeps the Sabbaths without polluting, defiling them, and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Do not let the son of the Gentile, who has joined himself to Yahweh, speak, saying, Yahweh has utterly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, behold, I'm a dry tree. For this is what Yahweh says, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths and choose those things which please me and hold fast to my covenant, I will give to them in my house, the house of Yahweh, even within my walls, a place, ministering positions with power, and a name equal to that of sons and of daughters. I will give them the name of the everlasting Yahweh, which will not be cut off. You know, there's people in the world that know the name of Yahweh. That is not what this is talking about. There's only one man in the world and his house that knows Yahweh, that truly knows Yahweh, his authority, his character. The only people that know that is the house of Yahweh. There's nobody outside here that could even... Yahweh says, I will give my glory to no gods. He's not going to give this to anyone else. And he is not a liar. You can count on that. He keeps his word. Can we go to the next slide? Now, we're talking about the white stone now. I got a call from a deacon in New York a few weeks ago, and he said, hey, there's another sermon that I haven't heard you mention that mentions the white stone. You might want to check it out. So, of course, I did. But before we get to that, before we get to this 12th book, part 2, speaking of stone, I want to show you something that Pastor shared with me. I'm not taking any credit for this. Pastor showed this to me just a few days ago. Remember he talked about Nimrod and how Nimrod is not a person. It's a system, right? Y'all remember that? If you look in all the encyclopedias, it tells you that Nimrod was born or began in 2289 BC. Just go look for yourself. When you count the years to 1934, when Pastor was born, from 2289 BC, you get, write this down, 4,223 years. So I went and looked, he goes, go look that up. Okay? So I went and looked it up, and I have it here. I have it on my, let me pull it up for you. It said 4223. No, that's not it. Bear with me. Consider me. So funny. Okay, it's pulling up. All right, here we go. 4223 is what I'm looking at here. Okay, 4223, here we go. I'm going to put it up here if you can all see it. It means, right here, if you look at this, it means struck. Struck. And it's from 4222. And I'm going to go back to that here. 42, I believe it's 4222. And it means to strike. Struck and to strike. Turn to Daniel 2:34. Daniel 2:34. Daniel 2:34. On page 673. 34, right? When was Pastor born? In 34. Hey, by the way, Matithia 24:34 says, that generation. That's just a coincidence again. You can look for yourself later. We won't go there. Notice, though, it says, you watched while a stone which was cut out without hands, struck the image. Remember that big image that some think is inconquerable? Well, with Yahweh, all things are possible. You're going to find that out in a few moments. You already know that, right? You know that because you believe prophecy, right? You believe the scriptures? Okay. It says, you watched while a stone which was cut out without hands struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Who's that? That's right, it's this house of Yahweh, right? The stone, the great stone of Abel. In 1934, the great Yisrayl Hawkins was born. It says, then the iron, the clay, and by the way, this word, it told you to go to Daniel 2:34. That's why I linked it to it. Because it's the only scripture it gave me to link it to. Isn't that amazing? It says, you watched while a stone, which was cut out without hands, struck the image. Verse 35, then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like the chaff on the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that no trace of them could be found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And eventually the whole universe, right? Man, this is awesome, man. You know, I don't know. Okay, so let's look at that slide again, the 12th book of Israel, Menorah, part 2. Now, this sermon that the deacon told me about is in chapter 14, verses 35 through 40. And when you add up 14, chapter 14, and 35, 40, it's 17. So let me turn there. Let me turn there and read this. Now, I want you to bear this in mind. Okay? Bear this in mind that what I'm going to read you, the only places that he talks about the stone and the white stone is in these verses that I'm showing you. Nowhere else in this sermon, you can go read it for yourself. It was 10:4:12, 10:4:12, which adds to 17. It was given on 10:4:12 at the Feast of Tabernacles. It's in the 14th book of the 12th part 2, or the chapter 14 of the 12th book part 2. And I'm reading from verses 35 through 40. I'm going to read rapidly, okay? It says, and now in verse 13 it says, and whoever falls on this stone, well, you go above it here and find out he's talking about a stone, referring to, of course, Yahshua. This stone is presented to the work of Yahweh and the high priest. He's the high priest, and that's shown in Hebrews 10:21. The high priest. And the high priest then gives the house of Yahweh in these last days a stone. He actually gives the house of Yahweh a stone through Yahshua. Yahshua is the one who gives it, but he gives the house of Yahweh this stone. He presents it to the one sent, giving it to his house. You got that? Verse 36. And whoever falls on this stone, he's quoting Matthew 21:44. And whoever falls on this stone that's given, will be broken. Now, you can bet your boots that's going to take place. Okay? Verse 37. If you hold your place there and go over to Jeremiah 23, I want to read this several times to you before the feast is out. He says, but he shows what a rotten mess the Masons are, how evil and wicked the Catholic Church has always been, the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians. He shows this. He shows it in prophecy that this is what they're going to be, and they're going to be hating the work of Yahweh. Every last one of them will hate the work of Yahweh enough to murder for it. As the man said, enough to kill. Yes, that hatred is that strong. They claim from this sodomizing children that they can also hypnotize that child. And later on in life, do a certain thing or say a certain word, and he'll go and perform something that they told him to do 30 years before that. That's called programming through sodomy. So records are kept on the people that this is being done against. It says, now this is the wickedness that's going on in this rotten mess called the beast, the beastly system. And of course, Yahweh showed this. And this is a reason that Yachanan said, don't think it any marvelous thing that the world hates you. Remember, this is what was told to you to begin with. The Savior told you they're going to hate you. They're going to kick you out of their synagogues. They're going to beat you. They're going to kill you. They'll do all kinds of things to you. They'll hate you that much. Well, here in Jeremiah, I'm going to skip down to verse 40 now. It says, he says in Jeremiah 23:5, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch. Well, we saw that word branch there a while ago. Going to raise it up to David. Other places show it's going to have a king ruling over the branch, beholding the branch, guiding the branch, leading the branch, giving the branch a white stone. Giving the branch signs in heaven that can't be denied in the clouds, written in the clouds. All of those things were prophesied. That's 35 through 40. Now, I was just reading from page 102, and 102 is 17 times 6. Can we go to the next slide? Now we're going to go to verse 66 of that same book on page 104, chapter 14, verse 66, which equals 17. And it says, righteousness means somebody who keeps the laws. The branch is also prophesied to teach the laws to all nations. That's the white stone that's been given to the house of Yahweh. You are the body of Messiah, and that white stone is given to you in the last days to teach, guide, correct, lead you to salvation, because salvation now is being offered. Why? Because you're going to receive all of this power that was promised in Genesis 1:26. Given to man, authority to resurrect the dead. Do you believe that? That's part of your job. And you're training for that right now, and you will receive these gifts, he said, I promise. Can you go to the next slide? Now I'm going to read from verse 102. And remember, 17 times 6 is 102. This is the last place he mentions the stone. Remarkable, right? He said, I was supposed to have covered all this morning, but I didn't get to it. But from the control that he will give you, he'll give you authority to tell the microorganisms what to do. And then as Yeketskia said, if you'll read that, y'all remember Yeketskia 37? The dry bones? Y'all remember that, right? Where he says to put the flesh and the sinew, bring the bones together, put the flesh, the sinews on, all that. Remember that, right? That's Yeketskia 37. He says, if you read that chapter about the bones coming together, well, the bones had to be formed again before they could come together, because those bones have long time deteriorated, turned back to dust. But they've got to be put back, come back together. And he says, praise Yahweh, and you're going to have that power if you endure, if you overcome and endure. To him who overcomes, will I give this power, Yahshua said, to him who overcomes. Okay, and that's verse 102 and 103. Now, turn to the next slide. I want everyone to read Yeketskia 37 on their own time. Go to the next slide, please. You think this is impossible? If you go to Jeremiah 32:27. Quickly, we're running out of time. Jeremiah 32. You think this is impossible, House of Yahweh? Has Yahweh ever lied to you? Jeremiah 32:27 says on page 601, behold, I am Yahweh, the creator of all flesh. Is anything too hard for me? Did you know that's the 777th chapter in the book of Yahweh? Did you know that 777 divided by 37 is 21? And that's 777, right? Go to Luke 1:37 now. Go to Luke 1:37. Luke 1:37. That'll be easy to remember. 1:37, and it says, for with Yahweh nothing will be impossible. Next slide, please. This is a microbiology book that the great sons of Yisrayl are studying. They actually made a podium to put this on. They take it so seriously. A reading podium with all the microbiology books underneath, and they're learning from the greatest microbiologists, two of the greatest, three, four of the greatest microbiologists known in existence. And remember, Genesis 3:14 tells you that the power to create and maintain flesh was taken from Satan. Do you remember the sons of Yisrayl on 3:14 getting up here and giving the whole service themselves? Do you remember the name of the sermon that I just told you in the second book of Israel? It says the sons of Yahweh are going to be given that power. The sons of Yahweh are going to be given this power. Next slide. When you see anything related to the number 37, think about 777. Perfection, sanctification, consecration, and truth. 37 is like 3 sevens. That has similar meaning. There's 7 chapters. There's only 7 books in the whole book of Yahweh that has chapter 37s. That's Genesis, Exodus, Yashub, Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and last of all, Yeketzkeh. They're the only one that have at least 37 chapters or more. Each of those chapters speak about being saved, made perfect, lifted up, or being thrown down or not being saved. Go read them. Remember Yosef, Genesis 37, thrown into the pit by his brothers and then lifted out, brought to Egypt. Remember all that? Read it on your own time. I got to hurry. Can you go ahead to the slide number where it says 512 on it? For you mathematicians that are learning, 512 is 8 to the third power. 8 times 8 times 8. 8 signifies new beginnings. Like the 7th day of the week is the last day, and then it rolls over to 8, and it's a new beginning. It's a new week. The first resurrection, remember Pentecost? Count 7 weeks, right? Next day, new beginning, new grain offering, Leviticus 23. Second resurrection, Feast of Tabernacles, 7 days, right? Representing 6,000 years given to man, 1,000 years of peace, and then after the 7,000th year into the 8th day is the second resurrection. Keep these in your mind. It denotes resurrection and new beginnings. Next slide. The year 2015, if you remember the definition, it means to be reversed. Remember what microorganisms do? They reverse, and they put the flesh back on. And you notice, if you look at 2015 backwards, it's 512. Next slide. I got 6 minutes to get through this. Y'all ready? Buckle your seatbelts. I've been eating a lot of that coleslaw, so... Okay, the other day, on 3/31/15, I called Pastor because these numbers are always in my head. I just can't help it. I'm sorry. I ponder these. I consider them. I compare them. This is what we're supposed to be doing, right, House of Yahweh? So I'm thinking about 3/31, and I called Pastor. I said, Pastor, remember on 3/31/2013, we saw the gold cloud with the ruby? And I said, remember the next year on 3/31? There's right over here. We saw the new moon. We saw Pastor's face on 3/31. I said, I bet today something's going to take place. We'll be looking. That afternoon, after school, I'm standing out in front of the blue school, and I saw some clouds that kind of looked kind of strange, so I took a picture. Here's the picture I took. Actually, can you show the next slide? There it is. Can you all see okay? Okay, don't worry about it, you can't see it. I'm just going to explain it. It was taken on 3/31 at what time? 5:12. Do you think I planned this? Oh, no. Now, here's the amazing thing. On my camera roll on my iPhone, it was picture number 512. I didn't see any of this until afterwards, okay? Remember, the disciples never saw it until after, and they went, what? Here's what I saw. And by the way, when me and the deacon that were working on shading this picture so y'all could see it, right when we were working on it, my phone rang, and it was area code 512. It was a call from Austin. And it was the senator's office calling and making sure that we were served and that everything they promised us had been given. Can you believe that? That has never taken place. They were worried that we had been served. And they kept their promise. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but they kept their promise. Now, here's what we saw while we were working on it. That's when he noticed, he looked at the properties on the picture and it said it was taken at 5:12. I know I got 2 minutes, okay? Here we go. Ready? All right, show the next slide. I'm sorry, I keep wanting to show you. Show the next slide. All right. You see up in the right corner, there's a power line right there. Remember power? Revelation 5:12. Above that power line, to your right, pastor's face is up there. You see him? Okay, take the slide down. Let me help him out. Right here. Can everyone see it? There's pastor. Here's somebody else over here. Well, pastor would be on his left, right? Somebody here, he's got a crown on his head. And here is a person. Look at this person. Do you see how lit up they are? Do you see that light? Make it, like Pastor said when he saw the donkey cloud, make of it what you will. Make of it what you will. But you're going to receive great power. And the resurrection is going to be taking place very soon. Blessed are those in the house of Yahweh that have learned microbiology, that are studying microbiology. Blessed are those in the house of Yahweh that get to the classes, that don't miss out on this beautiful opportunity. This is the greatest opportunity that anyone's been given. Don't throw it away, House of Yahweh. Nobody pastor doesn't want anyone to be left out. May Yahweh bless you. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to our great son of Israel, Abel, for a closing prayer.